Good morning, everybody. My name is Alexio Brown. I'm the research assistant with the Reef Ecology and Restoration Program. This is Dr. Jocelyn Curtis-Quick. She's the manager of the program. And without further ado, here is the intrepid Ponds Expedition Team.
Thank you, Lex. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda Madsen, and we are the Inland Ponds Research Team.
I'm Christian McIntosh.
I'm Anchialine Barrows.
Sky Heller.
I'm Rigby Knox.
I'm Laura Prophet.
And our project this semester is gathering baseline information on Anchialine ponds of Eleuthera, the Bahamas. So you may be wondering, what is an Anchialine pond? Well, they're landlocked bodies of water with subterranean or underground connections to the surrounding marine environment. They can greatly vary in a lot of different characteristics, including size, depth, and even color. They are also typically highly stratified, which means that the water is separated into layers. The word Anchialine derives from the Greek language, and it means near the sea. We get a lot of questions concerning the difference between Anchialine ponds and blue holes. The main difference between the two is their formation. Blue holes are formed in fractures in the Earth's crust or in collapsed caves. Because of this, they are typically very deep and can even be fully submerged under the water. We're not studying blue holes this semester because they're already extensively studied, and we would need to cave dive down into them to observe them, and we don't have that scuba certification. Anchialine ponds were formed around 12,000 years ago during the Holocene era in limestone and volcanic rock. They can be found in coastal regions around the world, including Mexico, Palau, Hawaii, Indonesia, and of course the Bahamas. There are several problems concerning ponds right now. The first is that there's a lot of development near and around the ponds. This is obviously bad because it contributes a lot of pollution to the environment, which is harmful to these fragile ecosystems. In addition, a lot of locals who have ponds on their property will stock them with oceanic species so they can have fresh fish, even if they can't go fishing. This is harmful to the ponds because it throws off the natural balance of the ecosystem. Lastly, these ponds are majorly understudied, so it makes it very hard to quantify the impact that humans are having on them.
And a large part of why these ponds are so understudied is because of the myths and legends associated behind them. One of which is the Lusca, which is a half shark, half octopus that supposedly lives in these ponds. But on a realer note, what we do think lives in these ponds are endemic species, which are species that whose habitats are highly restricted to a specific area, such as the remipede, which was found in a cave in Grand Bahama. What these endemic species do is provide a focus point for people to do campaigns and protect specific environments, as most of the time they're very endangered. They also provide a draw for ecotourism, as less than 1% of tourists that come to the Bahamas come and see an Anchialine pond. And so with these species, they can draw tourists towards them. So why do we research ponds? Well, much like outer space, they're highly understudied and very little is known about them. And so we go out and explore and assess these ponds with the purpose of collecting baseline data on these ponds to better understand them, as well as to obtain insight into their need for conservation here in Eleuthera. And with this purpose, we have three main objectives. First, to assess the types of Anchialine systems in Eleuthera. Second, to assess the biota or life living within the ponds. And third, to assess the overall health of the ponds.
To collect data, there are a series of methods that we use. We separated these methods in three areas: physical, chemical, and biological. But first we have to locate the ponds. We do this by either satellite imagery, for instance Google Earth, or from advice from local Bahamians, who will either tell us exactly where the pond is located or allow us on their property. Not all the time the ponds are accessible, so we then have to bushwhack to get to the ponds. When we arrive to the ponds finally, two people are sent out on a paddleboard with a GPS and a depth sounder. The GPS tells us, the GPS marks waypoints around the pond, while the depth sounder tells us how deep the pond is in a particular area. We then take this data to make bathymetry maps, which shows us the contours of each individual pond. The darkest blue shows us the deepest part of the pond, while the lightest blue represents the shallowest part of the pond. Then we go into chemical testing. We collect water using this Van Dorn here and transport the water into sample bottles. And then we use a Y-side, which is the Yellowstone scientific instrument to test for salinity, temperature, and dissolved oxygen levels in the water. And we also use a pH pen to test for pH and a turbidity meter to test for turbidity, of course, which is just how clear the water is. We then take these water samples back to the lab to test for nitrates, ammonia, phosphates using a colorimeter. We also drop a grub, as seen here, which is a baited remote underwater video with 4 sardines in a bait cage and a GoPro on top to observe any cryptic species or potential predators in the pond. We use a benthic transect method, which uses meter square quadrant and a 30-meter take to assess any benthic composition or bottom life in the pond. And if we think it's necessary, we collect species to take back to the lab for further observation. We also observe birds and insects around the pond, for instance, this white-cheeked pin-tailed duck, and plant life around the pond.
So from satellite imagery, we have found that there are over 200 ponds on Eleuthera. Out of these 200 plus ponds, we have studied and assessed 16 of them. So the largest of which we studied was Sweeting's Pond, and its maximum length was over 1.5 kilometers. The smallest was 2 Deep Pond, and it was only 35 meters across. So these ponds vary drastically in depth. This one ranging from less than a foot deep to 75 feet deep. And this darker area here is an indicator of a cave entrance to a subterranean connection connecting to the sea underground. So due to a variety of characteristics such as salinity, formation, size, and connectivity, we decided to categorize these ponds into 5 different types. The first of which is marine lakes. So marine lakes are generally large bodies of water with salinities the same as the ocean at 35 parts per thousand. We found one of the 16 ponds we assessed were marine lakes. Next we have Anchialine pools, which are generally smaller, shallower bodies of water with salinities lower than the ocean because they contain brackish water, which is rainwater and salt water combined. And we found 11 of the 16 ponds were Anchialine pools. Next we have blue chasms, which are very deep Anchialine systems with low turbidity and high water clarity that leads to this very distinct blue color that you can see here. We found 1 blue chasm. Next we have hypersaline ponds, which are more saline than the ocean due to limited connection. And they're generally very shallow because most of the rainwater that goes into them evaporates quickly. We found 2 hypersaline ponds. Lastly, we have man-made or artificial ponds, which are actually dug out by humans. And in the case of Fourth Hole here, that is actually on our campus, they're connected to the sea by a large metal pipe that runs underground. We found 1 man-made pond.
11 out of the 16 ponds that we studied were found to be impacted. The red stars represent the impacted ponds, and the blue stars represent the non-impacted ponds. Although we tried to study over the majority of Eleuthera, we were not able to reach the northernmost part of Eleuthera, so the northern ponds remain undiscovered. The definition of an impacted pond is a pond that has signs of pollution, human impact, physical changes, and introduced species. Locals often put fish such as snapper and grouper in these ponds to keep fresh for future use. These fish often become the apex predators of these ponds because prior to their arrival, the native species never had any predators. Never had any predators. We also believe that these fish are eating the endemic species of these ponds because 8 out of the 11 impacted ponds that had introduced species didn't have any endemic life at all. 4 out of the 5 non-impacted ponds had endemic species, while only 1 out of the 11 impacted ponds had endemic species. This statistic is very important because it proves the point that if a pond is impacted in nearly any way, it will more than likely not have any endemic species at all. So this is a video of shrimp. Shrimp were found at 5 of the ponds that we studied. These shrimp appear to be a very endangered species of red cave shrimp that are endemic to the ponds of Eleuthera. We also found seahorses in one of the ponds called Sweeting's Pond. This pond has the highest concentration of seahorses in the entire world. The concentration is 0.18 seahorses per meter squared. We also found unique species of blind cavefish in one of the ponds called in Cotton Bay. Lastly, this is a video of a diving duck. We found many important species to these ponds through using the BRUV, which I suggest you guys come to our table because this is a very cool video.
So the fact that we've found almost 70% of the ponds we've studied have been impacted by humans, and we haven't even looked at 10% of the ponds on Eleuthera is really concerning. And it means that there could be endemic life in ponds that we haven't even found yet that's already being affected by humans. Also, the ponds serve as connections to the subterranean cave systems on Eleuthera that are significantly understudied. The ponds are also really important nesting stops for migratory birds, so it's important that we protect them for that sake. As Christian said, the Bahamas National Trust estimates that less than 1% of visitors to the Bahamas every year ever visit an Anchialine pond, so there's a huge potential for ecotourism. It's difficult to protect these ponds because anything that affects the quality of the water table can affect the quality of the water in the ponds. So, for example, if there's a resort or hotel 4 or 5 miles away from one of the ponds that has a sewage system that isn't properly maintained, that can affect the water quality in the pond. So one way the ponds could be conserved is by limiting chemical use within a large radius of the ponds. So in order to spread our results and encourage follow-up studies, one of our research advisors presented this information at the 3rd International Symposium on Anchialine Ecosystems in Mexico last week, and 2 of our group members are presenting at separate conferences in the Bahamas in the next few months. And the Bahamas National Trust could play a crucial role in protecting the ponds because they're in charge of marine preservation in the Bahamas. We've been working with collaborators at Texas A&M University, Tampa University, and we've sent cave shrimp samples to Florida International University for genetic testing to see whether or not this really is a new species of cave shrimp. These are our citations. Any questions?
Sweeties Pond is such a fragile place with all the seahorses.
Yeah, so part of the potential for these ponds to be important in ecotourism, aren't these ponds really fragile? So isn't it important to protect them, and ecotourism could damage the ecosystems? So the ponds are really fragile, but part of the potential for ecotourism to be really important for the ponds is that if they're generating income for the government, it would be more in favor of protecting them, so they could find ways to safely implement ecotourism.
How did you do that? How would you do that in Sweeties Pond? This deep, where you go? I mean, I've been there, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question? Without damaging the ecosystem. Well, eco-tourists are tourists that tend to really care about the environment. So I'm sure, well, yeah, that's the name. I'm sure there would be many ways that they could come up with, such as like at one of the ponds called Turtle Lake. They allow people on kayaks to go see all the turtles and such. So that could be a safe way.
So it sounds like maybe one of your recommendations would be to do a quick survey of the remaining ponds to identify the non-impacted. Are there any, do you have a suggestion for a methodology or a way to do that, or any prospect of doing that rather quickly?
So how can we quickly assess the 200 ponds that are on Eleuthera, having just studied 16 of them? So as I said, there are tons of ponds on this island, and there's no real quick and easy way to assess them, but one way that we try and determine them is if they have easy accessibility and close proximity to human developments, which likely impacts the ponds.
You mentioned that you also studied the insects and bird and plant life around the outside of the pond. Did you note any differences between the impacted ones and the non-impacted ones in those areas?
So the question was, did we note any differences in birds and insects comparing the impacted and non-impacted ponds? So we actually found that there wasn't much of a difference. We found birds and insects at almost every pond, showing that they're generally healthy ecosystems, because most of the ones we went to were pretty remote locations. But we are focused on like introduced species. So introduced species, they can still provide a healthy environment, but the problem is they may destroy other life in these ponds, such as these endangered, possibly endemic species. Yes? Sorry, can you repeat that?
Are there any local laws protecting these ponds from the introduction of non-invasive species?
That's a good question.
So the question is, are there any local laws protecting these ponds? And currently there are no laws protecting the ponds, and that is one of the purpose of our studies, to find out how important they are ecologically, so that we could then move towards conservation and protection.
Additionally, a lot of these ponds are on locals' land, so a big problem is that like this is people's property, this is private property, so it's like they can do what they want with it right now. So we're hoping to get some restrictions to help conserve this endemic life.
What is the size range of the seahorses that you found?
What were the size ranges of the seahorses that we found? We didn't really look into their sizes.
I'm just asking you, like, general.
Oh, generally?
Yeah.
It could fit in the palm of your hand.
I didn't notice on the credits that you gave, is the Bahamas National Trust been consulted on any of this? Because I'm sure they might be interested, and that might be a good venue to get the Ministry of Tourism in. Because the Bahamas National Trust will make a way out to the ponds if it's on government land or whatever, and make it more interesting. You know, they can get the word out, they can help you with some advertising, and then that would in turn educate people and make people start being aware and maybe not have impact on ponds. Is there any Bahamas National Trust consulting or anything?
The question was, is there any Bahamas National Trust consulting? And so Andrika Burrows is actually doing a conference like with them. So this is how we're trying to spread the information to them right now.
Of the 5 ponds that you talked about, was there one particular kind that had a higher density of endemic species or more interesting features? And were any of those 5 ponds basically the same as blue holes except for in the formation?
So of the 5 can you repeat the question?
So of the 5, is there one kind that where you found a lot, more endemic species than in the others? And in terms of the other values like salinity and depth, are any of them pretty much the same as blue holes other than the formation?
So of the 5, how do I repeat the question? Were there any differences between the 5 ponds with the density of endemic species and or like other water qualities compared to blue holes or blue chasms? So yes, we took water quality tests for ammonia, phosphates, nitrates, and we did find some correlations. However, they weren't there. That's not what we were focused on, and they weren't really strong enough to really have any decisiveness. But in terms of concentration of endemic species, yeah, some of the ponds would have more shrimp than others, but generally it was all pretty relatively the same.